So, welcome everyone. As I've sort of said, this is going to be probably the second last of the sessions in this batch. So this will be, I think, this will be the seventh one I've done. I think Christina, when she's done the numbering, I think she started numbering from the second session. So some other things you'll have seen somewhere will be sort of one less than this. But this is the seventh session that I've done, and this one is really looking, there's sort of two parts to it, adapting to more paced life, and also there's going to be a special sort of topic looking at brain fog. For anyone new to these sessions, try to keep the initial sort of talk to about half an hour. Questions are very worthwhile if you're not sure you're understanding something, if something's put in a confusing way, you're not quite sure what I'm talking about, the screen goes blank, you can't see things. These sort of things rather know, but there'll be lots of opportunity at the end for questions. But I except not everyone will remember things to the end, so if something is pressing, feel okay to ask it now. Ideally, you can raise your hand using the reaction icons, but if you find that difficult, you're not sure how to do it, you can just speak, whether it's at a gap in me speaking or just speak over me, and that's okay. So this is just giving a quick overview of some of the things we're sort of going to be looking at today. So my name is Ben Wickens. I've got ME, coming up to my 11th year of having ME, and I got COVID last January. So I've had about 15 months of dealing with long COVID symptoms in addition to ME. These sessions and kind of looking at aspects of pacing, which I've been dealing with for a long time, both as an individual and also supporting other people through Stockport ME Group, a charity which I've been co-chair of for 9 or so years, quite a while. And I've also been involved in a research project that I've helped to design and deliver along with Workwell Foundation and Physios for ME, University of Liverpool and others, looking at heart rate monitoring for condition management for long COVID and ME. And within that, I've had to do some one-to-one supporting of people. Often that's been about technical aspects of using heart rate monitors, but it's also covered a sort of broader gamut of things as well. So I'm going to start off, long before I got ME, I was a person-centered counsellor. So I've been very influenced by the works of Carl Rogers. And when I was a psychotherapist, what would often happen is that people would have issues in their lives. They would have maybe belief systems that weren't really very healthy, but it often didn't matter that much until something happened in their lives, like a big event or something like that, like long COVID can be, that just made big sort of changes that made sort of like their old sort of ways of looking at the world and those belief systems irreconcilable with the realities that they're facing. So and I think this is something that's been very sort of true for a lot of people who've had ME, a lot of people with long COVID, where issues that they may have had can get in the way of actually accepting and loving the person that they are today. They might have certain values around work ethic, around exercise, around a wide range of things, and sort of long COVID has kind of pushed the reality of that very, very far away, and it creates a lot of issues, and it can create a lot of resistance in terms of making the changes that we need to make to be healthy and look after ourselves. Sometimes it might be people not pacing when they know they should, because there's something that kind of gets in the way of it. And a big part of that is accepting change, not that the change is forever, but that the person that you're now today might need you to do things a little bit different. And this is sort of a flashback to a slide I did sort of a couple of weeks ago, highlighting that, if you suddenly lost your eyesight, if you fell over and injured your arm, you might need to do tasks that you just take for granted very differently. And the same can be in terms of adapting to having post-exertion malaise. You may need to look at tasks in different ways, and quite often a lot of tasks we do very automatically, like driving, it's very hard to actually think how you drive a car. I've not driven for 10 years because I'm no longer safe to do so. But a lot of these tasks that you just very much sort of do without thinking about it, we've done in the way that worked in the past. But that might not work now with our sort of current sort of levels of sort of functioning, how we have to manage our energy and how we need to do things sort of differently. So part of what we're looking at and adapting to a sort of a paced life is re-examining how we do things and almost auditing that and see, is that the right way to do that for the me I am today? And what worked before might not always work now. It's quite hard to be open to these changes, be open to ideas that it might be that the job you're doing now doesn't need to be the job you do. You know, friendships that you have don't need to be the friendships that you have, or the way those friendships work don't need to be the same. Responsibilities that you have that might be in work, they might be in your home life, they might be in the community. It may well be that they don't need to be done by you. I've had quite a few careers over my life. One of my earlier ones, I was a legal trainee, and it was a very stressful environment where lawyers were very, very, very busy, and there was a lot of work to do. There was phone calls every minute, almost of every day, with people stressed, harassing people for things to be done. There was big piles of things to be done, and I remember some of the legal secretaries there. They would sort of very much sort of say, you know, make a sort of point saying, you know, graveyards are full of people who thought the world couldn't exist without them. That, you know, the companies would fall to the ground, nothing would sort of function. But actually, quite often when people do die, things kind of carry on much better than the people maybe would think they would. And just try to remember that actually things don't always need to be done by us. You know, we are, I don't mean replaceable in the sense of not being of value and not being important, but replaceable in the sense that if we don't do something, somebody else can. Um, and one thing that I think we kind of look at the internal language you use when you speak to, when we think about problems, quite often there's a lot of like resistance language or absolutes where it's like can't, I can't stop working, I must do this. And a lot of these language can be quite unhelpful because it might well be if you look at a situation that something isn't impossible, you might decide to do it anyway. You might decide that the consequences are worth being faced, but it's worth when you sort of look at how you're evaluating what you're doing, whether try to avoid sort of inflexible ways of looking at things, so that that's not saying you're going to or have to do anything differently, but just trying to be sort of like open to the idea that there might be different ways of doing things, and so you consider them. So, for instance, it's quite difficult for me not to walk my dog because she needs walks, but it can be that my wife does it more. It can be we hire someone to walk her sometimes. It can be we give her sort of stimulation toys that can sort of satisfy her so she needs less walks. There's changes that can be made, bigger gardens, all sorts of things that can be made that are maybe not obvious, maybe not easy to changes to bring about, but there are quite often changes that can be made. And sort of inflexible language, when we're kind of looking at problems within ourselves, can make it very hard to actually bring about those changes. A lot of adapting to more paced life is kind of, as I was saying, getting beyond the short term. When we've looked at problems before, I was very much encouraging people to look for easy wins. So there might be something like you do that's exhausting you and you don't need to do it. Well, maybe then just stopping that makes sense. But there are a lot of issues where it is more challenging. Work, family responsibilities can't just suddenly be stopped. And that's kind of what we're looking at adapting to sort of pace life, is trying to get beyond the short term sort of quick wins and trying to think about what changes we can make for the better. And it's really about trying to match your activities, goals and commitments to the you that you are today. Hopefully tomorrow you'll have a bit more energy and more energy the day after, but trying to make sure that the demands that you put on yourself for today are appropriate, and trying to bring about changes to sort of take some pressure off. Um, we've before we have talked about a lot of challenges, and it is really important to look at recruiting and training family and friends, and it's not easy, and it's not the same one answer fits everybody. Um, but just to give sort of simple examples, if you need to go and rest, and there's family, there's children coming in and jumping up and down on you, you're not going to be able to rest then. So you have to find a way of working with the people around you to enable, as well as possible, you to kind of get the rest and pace as effectively as possible. And it's really tricky to do, and it can require some difficult conversations, and it can sometimes take quite a long while to bring about those changes in place. And it's not always possible. Some people won't listen, some people won't change. Sometimes it can take lots and lots of times of trying. I think with those who love us most, it can be the hardest to accept the change. I think for an ill person who needs to rest and pace, inevitability almost requires us to accept it to some degree. If we don't, we get incredibly horrible symptoms. We can't do a fraction of what we could do otherwise. So it becomes almost something that we just have to at some point come to terms with. But it's a lot harder for our family because they're not faced so much with that need to accept it, and it is very hard sometimes to get family to understand and accept that we are ill, that we need to live our life differently, and we need some adjustments made in activities that are like family activities that we're sort of involved in. So I don't really have a simple answer for how to do this, because everyone's got different family and friends, and the extent to which you can train or educate it is different. But I think all I would sort of say is it almost always will need to be done at some point, unless you're a hermit and live on your own without contact with people. You're going to have to find ways of managing those interactions in ways that actually works with your health needs. It's not easy. Um, a key sort of stage in sort of adapting to pace life is trying to sort of plan your days and weeks that you have appropriate amounts to do each day and each week. And we're all different for what that means. So for me, I plan 3 rests a day. These aren't, I do something tiring, so I'm going to rest. These are sort of just standard rest periods. I will also get additional rest periods before and after tiring activities. I normally would just schedule one out the house or tiring activity a day. If I'm doing something that's very tiring, I'll try to make sure I don't have anything scheduled the day before or the day after, so I can rest up a bit and build up a little bit of energy reserves, and so that I'm not in a situation where I need to do things when I'm not well enough to do them afterwards. Um, so that I find sort of works for me, and I try to balance my responsibilities. So one of the reasons why I don't do paid work is I know that I could get periods like, for instance, today. I was quite sharp for some of the day, but for quite a lot of the day, I wouldn't have been able to, do a paid job. Um, so doing sort of voluntary work in ways that I can do it when I've got the energy to, and only commit to things that are comfortably within what I can do. So I can do this session with you tonight. I probably couldn't do that if I was not in my own house. If I had to travel somewhere, that would probably get it beyond what's something I could commit to. Um, so a lot of it is sort of trying to sort of make sure you have the range of sort of activities sort of planned that does sort of work with you, and you plan things in a way that you're not doing 3 very busy days and then 3 days where you don't have anything on. Now, exactly what's right for you will be very different. We all have very different energy envelopes. We all have very different ways in which our energy is drained. But that's just sort of an overview for myself. In my session last week, I talked a little bit about the mental load. Um, Sort of the idea that there's a lot of things that we do that drain our energy that we're not really aware of and are not given credit for. There's a lot of jobs done about the home that often, but not always, fall to a woman in a household, whether it's sending out holiday cards, stocking up items in the house, researching what's going to be safe household products, making sure the needs of the family are okay, making arrangements for meeting up with friends. There's a lot of duties and responsibilities that are passively taking up energy, but are often not really thought about. Um, and it doesn't need to necessarily be you who does all these things. It might be there's other people in your street, in your household, in your family that could actually take on some roles that you're doing that enable you to spend energy in different ways. Um, I'm not just looking at the sort of the invisible load, but the broad range of things that you're doing. Um, a lot of things can basically sort of reduce the energy that you have because they involve energy, whether it's sleep problems, other health issues, just things that you need to remember passively that when you were well, you just remembered them all the time. You remembered everyone's phone numbers, you remembered everyone's birthdays, and now those things take effort and they take energy. So looking at ways where you can actually be doing less, because you think we all have an energy envelope that's only got a limited amount of energy. We can pace well to try to stretch that out a bit, but there's a lot of things we can maybe look to not doing or do in a less fatiguing way, and reducing the load that we're facing can give us more energy to do what we need to do. It will be unique to us individually. Some people might find with, for instance, emotions, if I experience quite strong emotions, that really affects my energy levels. Even happy emotions, they just take up a lot of energy. Other people, that happens less to, so they don't need to think about that so much. And next week, a lot of what I'm going to be looking at for what I think will be the final of this group of sessions is setbacks and relapses. Now, the Bateman Horne Centre, they've put together a free sort of PDF ebook of about 40 odd pages looking just at this. And it's a really good resource. I'd highly recommend it. But what I would say is you don't want to be reading up on crashes and relapses when you're experiencing one, because it's very hard in that situation to process information. If there's advice for getting supplies in, you can't get supplies in if you're in this situation. It's things that it includes a lot of things that do need to be sort of done in advance. As I'm going to talk about it next week, I don't want to say too much today, but I would just sort of say, even if you do a very, very good job of pacing, there can be setbacks that you experienced. You could get another illness. I got a bug just before Christmas, and it took me about 2 months to properly recover from that. So sometimes it can be something that's beyond our control. And having things in place. So in my case, I've got a shower chair, so if I need to, I can use that for a shower. I've got a wheelchair. I've got extra supplies in. I'm in a situation where I've got a PA and a wife who will go on errands. So just bear with me a second as the dog gets resettled in. She's quite hard to sort of if she doesn't get her own way. But we're all slightly different in what we and what support we can access and what we need to do. I would sort of recommend people give it a little bit of thought, maybe check out the Bateman Horne guide or the session next week. But it's worth sort of being ready for. There also sort of, in terms of adapting to a paced life, there's a lot that you can do in terms of aids and adaptations. We're not just talking about wheelchairs and handrails. I found I got an awful lot of help very early on when I was learning to pace. That I used just like an egg timer, just a sort of little timer, and I found that was a really good way of timing. If I was doing an activity, I was trying to do some paperwork. When the egg timer went off, I stopped and had a rest. Then I would time that rest with the egg timer, and I didn't have the energy mentally to do much more than that, but that was sort of a real help. You can use mobile phones or Alexa or similar sort of voice activated devices for similar sort of purposes. You can use post-it notes. There's lots of things that you can do to assist not just your mobility, but so that you're less dependent on memory. I found my memory is now terrible, and trying to remember things is exhausting. So the more I do things in a way that's not dependent on my memory, then the less likely I am to fail and not do it properly. And also it can do things in a way that takes less energy from me. So I use lots of aids and adaptations, and I also try to do things in a way that doesn't require things that I can't do very well. And that's sort of an overview of some of the aspects of adapting to a paced life. There's a lot more to it than this, but it's a marathon, not a sprint. When you're making adjustments, you don't need to make all the adjustments at once. It might be you sort of look at it and think, well, I can do a couple of changes within the family so that maybe we can arrange when I need it. I can have a little bit of rest where I'm left alone, but I'm not going to try to change, who orders the shopping. I'm not going to change who cuts the grass. I'm not going to see if I can get something else done, but make whatever changes are sort of right for now. Then just try to sort of revisit it as needed. It's very difficult adjusting to not having as much energy as you want, not recharging that energy as quick as you want, and just having restrictions on what you can do and having to do things in different ways. So it's not a sort of an easy and quick thing like some other tips are. It's kind of a gradual process where over time, hopefully, you can get better and better at managing the condition. Now, I sort of want to look at brain fog. Brain fog, it's a topic that a couple of people asked to sort of have a bit more on, and I think it also ties in quite well with the topic. So brain fog, it's kind of a word that there's lots of different things that people mean by it, encapsulates quite a few concepts. I've kind of shown those in the right from an academic article I thought captured roughly what we think of as brain fog quite sort of clearly. One thing I'd say about brain fog, and this is true with ME and long COVID, it's not just PEM that can cause brain fog. There's other things that can cause brain fog. So it can be worth really looking into what those other causes might be. It might be sleep issues, might be dysautonomia, might be cardiac issues. There's lots and lots of issues that can contribute to brain fog, although I don't really know anybody who there's very, very few people who experience PEM and don't have some amount of brain fog. I find with myself that the better I pace and rest, the less my brain fog is, but it never goes away entirely. It's always there to sort of some degree. It's always something I need to manage around, but it can vary massively between being a mild restriction, being something that, okay, I'll be sharp for 10 minutes and then I'll be less sharp. So it can vary massively, but it's always there to a degree, so I can potentially read a complicated document, but I can also potentially get on the wrong bus. I can potentially read a very simple email that says I cannot do this and think it says can. And many of us are capable of some of these sort of mistakes and issues. So in terms of adapting to brain fog, lots and lots of research is coming out there suggesting that we're not actually as good at multitasking as we think we are, and actually multitasking can actually pose a much greater strain on our energy that when you have PEM than people might be aware of. So trying to do just one thing at a time makes things a lot easier. With myself, I found my memory is really bad, but also if something requires me to remember something, it is incredibly fatiguing. So earlier on today, my daughter was trying to teach me some ukulele chords, and I knew if I actually try to remember what you're saying, I'm going to be really tired. So I just sort of said, look, I'm not going to remember this, and didn't try. And I think we're not all the same with this. Some people can still remember things without it being fatiguing, but it's common that it is. I think when you experience brain fog, often overstimulating activities can be a particular problem. That can be the same with environments. If there's a loud or very busy environment, that can be very stimulating. I've been into sort of children's soft play centres, and within about 5 minutes of being in a child's soft play centre, it takes me about 8 hours to recover. And I know when my wife and some other adults are there, after a few hours in one, they are very tired, but nothing like the extent that I am. But these sort of sensory overload sort of places can be really problematic. Um, there's lots of aids and supports that are out there that you can use. AI is now good enough. You can actually sort of put paragraphs into AI and say, can you say this in a simpler way, please? Or you can just ask for it to explain something. You can ask it to reword sentences that you've produced, and it will do that. Sometimes when I'm writing, my sentences come together all garbled in a way that doesn't make sense. And what I found surprising was when I put that into AI, it came back making sense, not just me thinking it makes sense, but actually, you know, when I was feeling a lot sharper, checking through, it's like that's exactly what I was trying to say. Some people use sort of text to speech so that because they find if something is spoken, they can understand it better, so they can get it to their emails read out to them. There's a lot of things that you can do that can actually assist. Um, on the right, I've got the picture of someone who's blindfolded. And what I'm really trying to capture there is that when you're experiencing brain fog, it doesn't mean you can't do things, but it does mean the way you did them when you didn't have brain fog might not be right anymore. So it can be like learning to do things again. So often it's easy to think, oh, I can't do something because the way you used to do it doesn't work well. But actually, there can be some positives too. Just to give an example, most people, not with long COVID or any, but most people struggle to read something that's complicated, and we might not really be that aware of it. But if you're trying to write something in a way that's simple for you to understand, other people might be better at understanding it too. There are a lot of things that can actually, if you have brain fog, you might be able to do things in ways that have some advantages. If it's simpler for you, it's simpler for whoever is receiving it. I would encourage, it's very easy to judge yourself on the old you, but we're never, we're always in a state of change. We're not the person we were yesterday or a week ago. And trying to sort of be kind to ourselves and accept our limitations as just a part of us can really make a difference. I found I do need to watch what I do. There's a lot of things that I love doing, but I find too stimulating. I just start thinking about them when I'm not doing them, and it just becomes things that aren't really safe for me to do. So I've stopped doing them. Don't make out that's easy. There's lots of things I really enjoy doing that I don't do anymore, but it's a sort of a price that just enables me to focus on other things that I enjoy and not be in a position where I'm overstimulating myself, where my brain fog's increasing, where my level of functioning reduces. Um, I would sort of stress, if we look at the sort of person with the blindfold on, they're obviously not going to be safe in that current situation, driving the car or something. And I think it's very easy to just do the things you would normally do. It's always worth stopping and thinking, am I safe doing this? And is there a better way of doing this, bearing in mind I have brain fog? There's lots that technology can do to help, setting reminders and everything else. And it's often just about trying to find different ways of doing things in a way that works for the you are today. So I just want to give a fairly frivolous example of sort of reading. Before getting ill and having brain fog, I was a keen reader. I probably read, I don't know, depending what else I'd done in my life, 100 to 200 books a year. And what I found with reading with brain fog was that at first I would try and it would just be really exhausting. I'd feel pain, like headache pain, the room would spin round and I just couldn't focus. After learning how to pace quite well, it became something that I possibly could do again, but it wasn't the same experience that it was before. I had to change the books I was reading. So I used to read a lot of sort of literary fiction. I still read some literary fiction, but it's not the more complicated, long-winded stuff. I'm more likely to go for short stories. If I get confused and forget who the characters are or forget what's going on, I'm not abandoning a book halfway through. I'm abandoning a short story partway through, and then I can go into the next story. The same with poems. I read quite a lot of books of poetry. And again, with that, if something stops making sense or I forget something, it doesn't matter. I can reread it. I can go into the next one. I've also found I need to change when I read. I used to do a lot of reading last thing at night, and I'm often not sharp then, so it's not the best time to read. I'd often read in quite busy environments, might read whilst family members are watching TV or my daughter's running around. And I now just read when I'm on my own in the quiet. I find I use Wikipedia and other sites to remember plot and characters, because otherwise I get confused and forget who's who. So things like that can help me a lot. And sometimes I look at reviews and that can help explain things I've maybe got confused about. It does sometimes mean I find out who done it at the end of something, but I found it just enables me to enjoy reading in sort of different ways. I also, make sure I take lots of breaks, much more than I would sort of normally. I'll try to check in my focus and how fatigued I am. Particularly if I'm reading something that's quite compelling, I'll make a point of just stopping and thinking, do I need to have a rest? And I'm not always able to read for pleasure. I might go through a week, 2 weeks, a month, where I'm just not well enough to do it. And I just kind of need to sort of let go of that and be okay with that. Because otherwise, if I try to read what I'm reading, it'll stop making sense and I'll just end up not being sort of fun. One sort of challenge I'd like to make for people to consider themselves is brain fog. It can be, it's just something awful that you've got to deal with. But it also can be an indication, a warning that you might be doing too much. So it's just a challenge. You can do this or not do this as you wish. When you're experiencing brain fog, your brain fog is increasing. How much is that is something that you should be striving through? And how much is it, somebody tapping on the shoulder saying, maybe you're doing a bit too much. Maybe you need to stop and have a bit of a rest. I've certainly found with myself, there's times when I've got something that just needs to be done and I have to sort of power through, have caffeine, etc. But quite often at the same time, my brain fog is much worse and it's much more present when I'm overdoing things. And it's kind of telling me, actually, I need to do less. So there's more sort of things I could sort of go through. Brain fog can make a big challenge with relationships and communication. My daughter's got hearing issues. She needs to communicate differently when her hearing is bad, when she's got glue ear. And in some ways it's a little bit like that. It's not necessarily always worse, but it's just different. I have found with leisure activities, sometimes it's easier to do something new or a variation of an old hobby rather than trying to do the same thing I used to do, because it hits problems around brain fog or other aspects of PEM where it's hard to do something I used to like doing when I have to do it now in a very different way. So it's sometimes easier to do slightly different activities than those I used to do, rather than trying to do the old ones and hit problems, because the old ways don't work. I do want to finish on a positive note. There's lots of research looking at brain fog at the moment. Sometimes it's come from other areas other than long COVID. And I feel quite optimistic that some of this research and some of these treatments, that some of which are already available to people, may actually help. Although I haven't tried these myself, and the biggest benefit that I've had is just been with good rest and good pacing, and they have not eliminated my brain fog, but reduced it significantly. So that is everything. I will end recording.